I think you all would agree that what we have done is greatly expand now this conversation about the role of a journalist. I mean, we began by hearing Attila talk about activism. Not that you were claiming that it's the same thing as journalism, but a very interesting element which has been introduced and which comes along naturally, I must say, with these new developments that enable journalists to reach people through different platforms. And issues are raised once we become responsible for understanding better what the public wants. And then, you know, the old, well, I just deliver the news feels not adequately responsive to people in situations, I think, like yours, Attila. And Juan Luis has definitely expanded the conversation by telling us really about entrepreneurial journalism, which is kind of a sister to open journalism in many ways, and which is an attempt to respond to the fact that the old media models, especially economically, are very much challenged, as we all know. And so people are becoming their own brands. People are, as you interestingly put it, Juan Luis, becoming managers again, which we're not terribly well suited at being, many of us journalists, I think. And I'm intrigued because, Tim, I think I'm quoting you correctly when you said that, I mean, you just sort of forthrightly called these people with their iPhones photographing at the protest at Occupy Wall Street, these new journalists. So, okay, what then would we say as a panelist? You all have been so good about being brief, and I am going to let you tell your story. What is the role? I mean, I assume you would differ among yourselves. Would the rest of you agree that those people taking the photographs, and John and Tarlek, you should feel free to jump in on this, are journalists? And would you really assert that? Because you later sort of backed off and said committing acts of journalism.
Is that a question for me?
Yes.
Or am I to be? I do not. I tend to shy away from the process of defining what is and what isn't a journalist, and I do tend to think that the active journalism framework is much more important because it doesn't require that a person have a certain credential or a certain professional training in order to participate. Do I call a lot of the people documenting the Occupy movements that I've witnessed firsthand journalists? I'm not sure that they would call themselves journalists. There are some of them that do, and then there are some of them that don't. And frankly, I don't really parse the two. If the content that they are creating and sharing is factual to their best of their knowledge, and it is shareable in a way that advances the conversation, that's good enough for me.
Well, let me turn it back to Attila. I think that I heard you say that you thought that while you weren't contending that everything that your website does is journalism, on the contrary, you were certainly not, but you were contending that journalists should be activists, I believe.
Yes, so I think that you said that the journalism is, the old model of journalism is economically challenged. I think it's challenged from a content point of view as well, or I would say rather from a process point of view. In an age where everybody wants to share and information wants to be part of the whole information chain, we have to, I think as journalists, we have to treat in a different way our audience. So I was emphasizing basically in my speech that we consider the people formerly known as audience as...
we should give Jay Rosen some credit here for that phrase. Thank you, Jay. Yeah.
As members of a community who wants us journalists to do something, and what's that something? That something is verification, first of all. Serving the information needs, because they create a lot of content themselves on Twitter, on the Freedom of Information Request platform we created, on the corruption reporting, tracking platform we created, where they upload their own stories about corruption, but they want us to do something about those stories. So first of all, report those stories, so verify those stories, and also activist in a way that we have certain issues. So I wouldn't say that we are activists in all kinds of issues. We have very specific issues like corruption-related topics and transparency and media freedom. These are basically the three issues in which we have a very activist stance. So, for example, in the source protection regulation, I mean, when we started the operation 3 years ago, the first week of our operation, the police was knocking on the editor-in-chief's door, private home. So, of course, we have to take an activist stand, because that's how we can operate. If there is no real source protection regulation in the country, we have to fight for it. And that's basically the same for freedom of information as well. I mean, originally, Hungary has quite a good freedom of information legislation, which the current government was trying to change. And one of the reasons why they were trying to change is our organization, because they said that there is an abusive level of freedom of information request, because we were not only requesting contracts and public documents, but we were requesting invoices behind those contracts. And the government was saying it's abusive. It's an abusive level of request. So of course we have to take an activist stand, because that's, if we ask money from our audience, we tell them subscribe or support us with private donations and financing. What we give in exchange? We give in exchange verification of their stories, and we actively fight for certain issues why they are paying us to be there. And also one important element is to engage a very active public debate. I think that's a very journalistic activism, that not only report on things, but we organize meetups and events in issues which we cover. And we serve as a kind of moderator for public debates, which is, I think, very close to what journalism is.
Juan Luis, you wanted to say something on this topic?
In my view, the entrepreneurial journalism is based on open journalism. I mean, I agree with you. These people in Occupy Wall Street or whatever, they don't think they are journalists, but it doesn't matter. What they want to do is to participate in the public sphere. What they want to do is to send their photos to be sent to be published by media. And also what they discovered is that if they contribute to traditional media, they have no voices. But if they contribute to these new media platforms or whatever, they can expand and spread the message, which is very, very important. Also, there's another interesting examples. There is a huge demand of political science contents, political science and also economical science. And these people are blogging and sending the contents, selling the contents for traditional media. So, I mean, it is more important to be part of the network much more than to be only journalist. So it's not the case, I think, in the case of the Occupy or in the case of Madrid, 15M and so on. They are not journalists and they don't want to be.
So I don't know if this is an interesting thing for both of you. I mean,
what I was going to say was I think that I think that it's possible to. It would take a lot of debating, but it should be possible, I think, to arrive at some kind of acceptable definition of the function of journalism, which might sound something like